We're going to be reading Frederick Douglass and how he learned to read. It's from chapter 7 in his autobiography. And at that time, for slaves, it was against the law. So he legitimately had to break the law to learn how to read. And it's a very interesting story, and we're going to read that next week and maybe even the week after, because we're going to do a lot with it. And when I started thinking about this piece, it made me remember a former student. And this student's name was Jose. He was 15 years old. And Jose, I was at the Juvenile Detention Center, which I worked there for a while. And Jose came walking in a green jumpsuit with a big giant mound of hair on his head. And he wore plastic sandals. And he was carrying his sleeping mat under his arm. And when he came in, he went directly to the back of the classroom and did not say a word. The Juvenile Detention Center, you wore a green jumpsuit, which everyone called a turtle suit, your first 21 days. If you saw 100 clients, that's what they were called, if you saw 100 clients milling about, you could spot the newbies because they were wearing green. And after 21 days, you phase up to shorts and a red t-shirt.
That's epic.
After 6 weeks, you phase up to tennis shoes. So he came in, and the first 21 days, you also have to sleep in the hallway, and which was why he was carrying his mat under his right arm. And so people are walking over you and everything like that. Now, after 21 days, you get to share a room with another client. So Jose was sitting in the back, and it was typical. You never knew when a new student would show up or when a student that you had for a while would get discharged. When you got there, it didn't matter what crime you committed. If you were in a level 5 facility, which this one was, you served 6 months. And that's what you started with. Very few students were able to get out in 6 months because you had to really fly straight. And the most time I've ever seen a student do was 18 months because they kept getting in fights. And so Jose was sitting in the back. Now, day 2, he came and Barbara got to him and he was shaved. So now he looked like everybody else, except he still had the green suit, the turtle suit. But now he was shaved.
Did they make you shave?
Yeah. And he still sat in the back. And he didn't say a word. And after 4 weeks, you go and you see a judge once a month. And the judge has access to all of your files. So if you got in a fight, if you weren't following rules, you weren't making your bed in the morning, you were caught with contraband, which could be something as simple as a sugar packet in your room. Then a judge could see your file, and a judge could add time to your 6 months. And school is legally required, as you guys know. Truancy is the name of the crime if a teenager doesn't go to school. And so when you're locked up, you may have missed a lot of school on the outs, running with the gangs or whatever, but when you're locked up, you go to school every single day. And the judge wants you to make a C in every subject. And if you don't, then that could be people have had time added on because they weren't passing their classes. And Jose had the word Latin in old Roman English font down this arm right here. Latin. And then he had the word kings down this arm.
Latin. Is that a game?
Yes. Okay. Now, after a couple weeks, there's a pecking order that takes place here. Much like any organization, even here amongst this school, there's a pecking order. It may be more subtle than a juvenile detention center, but nevertheless, when it's an all-boy facility, there's a pecking order. There's machismo, there's bravado, there's masculinity, there's who's going to be the leader. And I noticed after a few weeks that even though he was new, he was emerging as someone that the other peers respected. You could just see it. Now, I don't know if he was getting the respect from other clients because of something on the outs that I knew nothing about, or if he had garnered that respect after being in there and that was just how they felt he deserved. But nevertheless, I could see that he was someone that the other students respected. I had one conversation with him in that 4 weeks before he went and saw the judge. That was the only time he talked to me. And he said he liked lifting weights. And even though he was 15 years old and he had a small frame for, he was still growing. He was 15. You could tell he lifted weights. I mean, he was cut. You could tell he was. And so I wasn't surprised when he said that was one of his things he liked to do. Nevertheless, that was my only conversation with him. I had to submit grades for him to go see the judge, and I gave him a 15 because honestly, and to this day, I'm still thinking about how he got a 15 because he did not do anything. Okay? I mean, when I say nothing, I mean nowhere. He sat in the back and did not talk and just sat there and did not do anything. And when he went to see the judge, he wasn't in school that day. As a matter of fact, they were leaving as I was coming to work because you have to drive in a white van to the Orlando courthouse. And when you go off campus, they put handcuffs on your wrists and handcuffs on your ankles to the point to where you're walking like this. Okay? And I saw Jose get in the van just like that with about 4 other clients. And it was their turn to go see the judge for their monthly visit. So he wasn't in class that day. And the next day he was. And when he showed up, he came to me and he said, "Mr. Ellis, can I talk to you alone?" And I said, "Absolutely." To me, this was progress. He was engaging me. And I knew that in this environment that sometimes students could take a while to acclimate. Some students get there right away and you tell me how to jump, I'll jump. Because they want to get out in 6 months. Other students, they're just in a different mindset for a week. And then they say, okay, all right, I can do this. Some take 2 weeks. He was 4 weeks. And I knew that was a little long and I was a little worried. And I went and talked to one of my Hispanic colleagues and I said, is there a language barrier with Jose? Because he's not doing any work. And my Hispanic colleague said, he speaks English better than the white and black kids. He doesn't have a language barrier. So I knew that something else was going on. I just assumed that he had made up his mind not to do any work. And I said, well, eventually he'll come around because everybody wants to go home. And the day after he saw the judge, he said, "Can I speak to you alone?" And I said, "Certainly." When you go into when you go into my classroom, there was a guard there who would pat the clients down, and then they would take a seat. And when they left, they were also patted down. And so a 55-minute class, you were lucky if you got 35 minutes with the students by the time everyone was patted down. So he was standing here waiting to speak to me alone while each of the students were being patted down, and it just seemed like it took forever. And finally, the last student was patted down, and they were outside, and it was just he and I. And Jose started to talk. It was the longest, like I said, I hadn't talked to him in 4 weeks. And he said, "Mr. Ellis," he said, "I saw the judge yesterday." I said, "Yeah, how'd that go?" He said, "The judge told me if I didn't bring my grade up in your class, he would add time to my 6 months." And he says, "That can't happen. I have to go home." He says, "I can't be here any longer than I'm supposed to." And I said, "Well, you gotta bring it up to at least a C." And he says, "Yes." He says, "I know." And he kind of leaned in and his voice dropped a little bit and it was almost cracking. And he said, "But Mr. Ellis, I can't read." And now there are students who may be he was in the 9th grade. His paperwork said he was in the 9th grade. There are students in the 9th grade that read on a 4th grade level and stuff like that, but they can read and write. They just don't read and write on grade level. When he said he could not read, he could not read. Okay? So, I remember the last time I was in Office Max, I noticed I was a brand new teacher and, still cutting my teeth on how to do this job. And I remember Office Max had an aisle where there was elementary books and stuff. And I just remember seeing it one day. So I said, after work, I drove down there. I went to Office Max and I bought him a first grade book. And when I looked at the book, it was all cartoonish, as you would expect an elementary book to be for a 6-year-old. And my first thought was, he's never going to accept this. This is an insult. He will see this as an insult. And then my next thought was, and the other students will ridicule him if they see it. So the next morning I went to work and I got the blue construction paper out and I stapled blue construction paper to the outside of the book. So if you looked at the book, you couldn't tell what it was. And luckily for me, I had a large classroom, and so it was almost twice this size. So I took a desk and I set it all the way to the back. And when Jose came in, I directed him to sit at the desk in the back. Why is Jose sitting back there? Independent study, don't worry about it. Oddly enough, no one ever asked again. After the students were working, I went back there with the book. And now was the test. Was he going to accept it or reject it? So I showed him the first page, and it was a picture of a cat. And it had 3 underlined. And then on top of the line was a C that you trace, an A with the dotted lines, and a T with the dotted lines. And I couldn't believe when he grabbed the pencil and his brows furrowed like he was concentrating. And you could draw a C without even looking, but he was like, almost like it took all of his thinking. Then he drew an A and then a T on the dotted line. He only had to trace. Then you turn the page and there's another picture of a cat and 3 more lines, but only this time there's no dotted lines to trace. And I sat there and watched him as he would revert back to the C that he had just traced. And then he would go back and he would draw a C. And then he would look at the A, and then he would draw the A. The next picture was a dog, and so on and so forth like that. And it was as if someone set a fire under Jose. It was like he was waiting, like, oh, this is it? This is how you write? Okay, give me more. So he flew through the book, got him a 2nd grade book, flew through that. And at one point, I was teaching, and he was like, Mr. Alice! Mr. Alice! I said, hold on, I'll be back there in a minute. Finally, at one point, I was able to get a break from the class, and I went back and said, what's going on? He had tears in his eyes. He had tears in his eyes, and he says, that's my mom's name.
Aww.
Later, he wrote his sister's name. And I thought back to 2nd grade when you write a Mother's Day card, when the teacher makes you write a Mother's Day card, way back when, and here he was 15 and he had never written his mom's name. And he was discharged on a day when he was discharged and I didn't know it, and I went to school the next day and he wasn't in class, and everyone told me, oh, he got discharged last night. I knew he was, close to being discharged, so I wasn't surprised, but I was a little sad because I didn't get to say goodbye. And after the school day, I went and checked my teacher mailbox, and this note was left in it. And I've received a lot of notes. I've been teaching for 11 years. I have a really good relationship with a lot of students who are now doing great things, and I still stay in contact with them, and I cherish all the notes that I've ever been given. But I got to say that of all the notes I've been given, I think this one is one of the best. And I cherish it. And, the reason why I'm telling you the story is because you guys think that you're having a bad day sometimes, and you may have a bad day. But I'm going to tell you something. If Jose could be sitting where you're sitting with the knowledge that you already have, he would give anything to be here. Mm-hmm. So just think about how privileged you are and what a blessing it is, and, to have be able to write and read